We're here at the boxing club in Rafo, as you can see. Wonderful setup here, and delighted to say I'm joined by Peter O'Donnell, Rafo Boxing Club and President of the Donegal County Board. Peter, nice to see you and nice to be here in your hometown in this wonderful facility.
Same as that, Charlie, and it's very nice to have you.
Thanks very much. Also with me is my colleague and good friend, Chris McNulty. And the reason we're here is to talk about this book, Donegal Boxing. Boxing in Donegal, a history. And I can tell you, this is a history and a half. Chris McNulty, I was bamboozled by the amount of detail that's in it. I know that you're very particular when you do a job and that sort of thing, but producing this book, the amount of work that went into it must have been absolutely incredible.
Yeah, it was funny, Charlie. This started back, I suppose, at the start of the last lockdown. Myself and Peter were talking before it, and I'd come across, by pure accident, researching something else, an article announcing the formation of the County Donegal Board in 1950. I thought, geez, that's interesting, because there was always, on the headed paper, it always referred to 1968.
Yeah.
I thought, geez, so I went back and did a wee bit of research and realised, obviously, then the penny dropped at 70 years of official boxing in Donegal. So myself and Peter decided, it would be nice to record all the champions, and started, and it went from sort of a very small kind of a project, not kind of myself knowing the depth or the volume that it would go, but every time I was kind of looking for a champion or looking for a winner, you kept uncovering these other wee things, and they were too good to leave out. Like, we started with a plan to do maybe a wee 100-page booklet, and we've ended up with 350 pages. But it just kind of grew and grew legs, Charlie, and the stuff was just too good to leave out.
Yeah. Chris mentioned 70 years official boxing, but I mean, boxing goes back much, much further than that here in the county. I mean, there's records from the 20s and 30s of people boxing at a very high level in this county, Peter.
That's right, Charlie. This county here has produced some great boxers, and you can go back right over. Initially we were doing the 70-year history, but you can actually double that to 140 years, because we have a story on it there from the 1880s. It's a story of the Lynch family from Stony Hill and down outside Muff, who left in the middle of the night. They walked to the boat in Derry and landed in the Garbles in Glasgow, and they were the grandparents. That was James and Rebecca Lynch, the grandparents of the great Benny Lynch, who went on to be world flyweight champion, Yeah. And it talks about the hardship and one thing and another then. But Chris has been solely instrumental in setting this whole setup up here for the book. And it's a fantastic history. Some of the stories is unbelievable. It needs to be read to be believed, Charlie.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Peter, because I was attempting to read it, Chris, but you could spend days reading it and you wouldn't have all the information gathered. Things that jumped out at me, Chris, at the last chapter, you talk about all the Donegal international medalists, you talk about international tournament medalists, you talk about Donegal champions. I mean, the level that people boxed at and the success they had was just incredible.
Yeah, I think people often forget the mark that Donegal has made in boxing. I suppose in the modern day, Jason Quigley is the headline man, and we look at the professionals that we've had in the county in recent years. But you go back to those days of, international tournaments in Donegal, where there was teams from Germany coming with leading politicians of the time. And I mean, bear in mind, this was Germany that was just out of the war in the mid-40s, so you're coming into the 50s and 60s. They were bringing teams to Letterkenny and Donegal town and places, and getting 600, 700 and 800 people in to watch them. I mean, boxing had really captivated, like you go through I suppose what we'd call the leading sports at the county. Some of them wouldn't have been at that time getting 600, 700, 800 people, and you think, how hard it was to get to those venues and stuff at that particular time, to be drawing venues. I mean, boxing must have been, I suppose, I'm only getting, the third, fourth hand accounts and reading press reports at the time, but it must have been a serious outlet for people when you look at that. I mean, 800 people going into the cinema in Letterkenny to watch boxing, and even, we spoke about it yesterday, Charlie, the old mental hospital in St. Connell's, and the dining room there, and people being locked out, people not being allowed in. And if you said that now to people, that there's a boxing tournament next week in Letterkenny and you won't get in, people would think you're mad, because that, I think it's probably, it's sad the way that interest has waned in the sport, but, it must have been at that stage, particularly the 50s and 60s, it must have been actually heaving, it must have been on a real high.
It's great for Chris that he can talk about that in terms of hearing about it. We're old enough to have been there. I remember boxing tournaments in St. Connell's, packed halls. My brother Liam did a bit of boxing there when he was at it for a while as well, Peter. And I was just looking at the book, the number of places in the county that had boxing clubs was it's just unbelievable.
It's unbelievable, Charlie. I think that in every small village and town in Donegal there was a boxing club. There was one season there not too long ago where we had 22 clubs. Yeah. At the minute we have 15 clubs in the county, but we had 22, you know, back a few years ago. And it's the cost as well now. They're running a club and one thing and all, not that many regulations with yard of vet and child protection and what have you. You know, it's just not the way it used to be, you know. But it's great to get it put out there. And the only thing that we kind of regretted at the time that we didn't get the launching night that we were going to have. Like, we would have had a big night. We had the date and all set in the Villa Rose, Buffet for the 18th of September 2020, and we would have had a lot of personalities there, you know, and we would have had a big night, and we'd have a bumper night for the boxing in Donegal with the celebrities we would have had there. Two former world champions and an Olympic gold medalist and everything there. We had them all lined up. We had a bit lined up with the BBC, Northern Ireland, with the UTV, and we were waiting on word back from RTE for Eileen Magner to do a wee bit on it as well. So we had everything in motion, and that's the only wee loss we had with it. But it's great now to get it out, and it's great for the county. And it's something that Chris has got here now that he's really preserved the boxing all down, over 140 years of boxing. You know, and the man that's coming behind, you do any more, he has it all to press a button. It's there in front of him. You know.
Maybe we'll have that big night at some other stage in the future. The book will still be there, Peter. And just picking up on a point, you know, so many clubs at that particular time. I have a long list of them there, probably more than 22 at one stage. It was an outlet for people in those communities as well, because let's not forget that there wasn't much to do, not as much to do as we have now back then, and this was wonderful for people to go to the boxing club, to keep fit, to meet people, and to compete as well against others from other clubs.
That's right, Charlie. It was a part of everyday life. The boxing club was a part of everyday life in all the wee villages and all the wee towns. It was great to have it, like, and some of the men that Donegal boxing had, like, you know, from Pa Sharkey, Harry the Kid Duffy and all them boys there, real household names, you know, on boxing. It was fantastic.
Yeah. Chris, were you surprised when you got into the crux of it, just how much success Donegal boxers have had at the highest level, at amateur, and of course now in more recent times at professional as well?
Yeah, I think I was surprised, Charlie, and I suppose the one thing that disappointed me, or the one thing that made it maybe harder than it was, there's no official record of these things. I mean, even there at the weekend, like, you know, I was checking a man's history, just double checking stuff before I put the book to print, and like, there's nothing in the history books. There doesn't exist a history book that, you know, if Chris McNulty or Charlie Collins say they won an Irish boxing title, there's nothing there to verify or not. So what's in here, Charlie, is 345 Irish titles that have come back to Donegal. They're all verified titles. They're all titles that there's proof that they were won, if you get me. There's 310 of those have been won under the auspices of the County Donegal Boxing Board. Now, I suppose just to explain that, there's a lot of boxers, Charlie, from this county. Cathal McMonigal being one. He's our most successful senior amateur boxer. He's won 5 Irish senior titles. But Cathal won those titles boxing out of the Holy Trinity Club in Belfast. Yeah. His brother Stephen as well won Ulster titles and stuff like that. Brett McGinty, of course, a great champion out of the Oakleaf Club in Derry. So we've included all of those, and we've also obviously included the boxers like Tyrone McCullough, for instance, who have come the other way and won with clubs in Donegal. So there's probably a bit of, you know, people will be kind of looking at certain things, but there was a method in terms of how everything was calculated and stuff like that. But going back to your question, I was very surprised in terms of those early years, the impact that boxing made in the county. I mean, Peter mentioned Pa Sharkey there. Pa Sharkey gave up a full-time job in 1956 in Australia. The very reason that the guy moved to Australia, he gave it up to boxing the Olympic Games. Yeah. And Stephen McMonigal then a couple of years ago gave up a job to box in the Commonwealth Games. A very similar story, but you think in those times there, like, he moved to Australia to work, and a very good job he was in, and gave it up just to box at the Olympic Games. The minute he was beat at the Olympic Games, there was no money to keep him there, so he had to get out of the camp. Yeah. You know, you think, like, there was no appreciation of what he was actually doing. I think it's probably only in recent years, you know, when those stories start to come to light that you see. You talk about Brian Anderson. I mean, he went away to the Middle Road Club in London. also went to the Olympic Games, with a very famous team, and actually ended up doing the corner for a couple of fights out in Tokyo as well. Came back and won an Irish senior, what's now the Irish elite titles as well. Like you look at the mark that those people made. Like Pa Sharkey was from the Rosses. There's a full chapter about the early Rosses years before even there was a formation of the club, and some of the names, and some, like Peter mentioned, Harry Kidd Duffy had 250 fights or something, and won maybe I think 190 of them odd or something like that. Jack McLaughlin from Letterkenny had 500 fights before he was 20. He retired at 24 after fighting 500 times, won 6 Irish titles. And again, you look at the era they were in, and only now I think, we spoke, myself and Peter, to a lot of clubs, and this isn't a criticism of the clubs at all, because the system wasn't there. They didn't know how many champions they had. They were thinking, geez, that guy won 1 or was it 2? And there was a lot of, there was a guessing game. So I suppose at least now there is what I think is as close as we're going to get to an official record of Donegal's champions. Like, we've gone through international tournaments, 4 nations, multi-nations all over the world. Like, it's quite an extensive list when you go through them. Like 71 medals at international level. And a lot of those, bear in mind, are from, say, the last 30 years when, the opportunities to box in an Irish vest presented themselves more frequently to young boxers from here.
Yeah. And a figure like 350 champions coming back to a county like this per head of capital, that's massive, really, Peter, isn't it? And it just shows the amount of talent was there. But obviously there was a great coaching structure in place as well, because you just can't get into a ring and do your own thing. You need a bit of advice and a bit of guidance there as well.
That's right. You had the coaches as well, Charlie, some great coaches. And at that time, you had a lot of men staying with the game when they finished their own careers. They stayed with their clubs. A lot of loyalty then, and they kept their club going, and they produced a lot of boxers and a lot of champions. Yeah. It was great for the county, you know what I mean? And you're talking about per head of population, I think this county here, Donegal, and all sports per head of population, they're not another county in Ireland would love with.
You've seen and done it all, Peter. But when you saw the stats that Chris was producing in terms of the success that they had, did it surprise you?
It's really surprised with it, Charlie, because really and truly there were never no records. We were even at a guessing game. We hadn't that many champions altogether, but we were still guessing. Yeah. Who was your mammy? Was he with Conway or with us when he won that title or wherever it was? There were no real records kept, down the years. There were no register within the county board to keep all that, and they document 70 years on the auspices of the Donegal County Board. It's a fantastic job that Chris has done.
Well, there's that many photographs and stuff around these walls here, Peter. You nearly have done it yourself here, because it's an incredible sight here. All the walls are covered with memorabilia and tournaments from way back and personalities and that. I mean, there's a treasure chest of information here, and I'm sure a lot of the boxing clubs are the same.
There is, surely they got that, Charlie. A lot of the clubs the same, and a lot of history on the walls, and it gives a boxing gym, it gives it but a character. Their men could come in here to leave a boxer in, and they see this, and they're asking you, could I come in tomorrow, and if I walk around, and they go around the walls reading bits and pieces, you know what I mean? And it's great to have it, you know what I mean? And it's homely, and everybody's more than welcome, And as regards all the young boxers coming in, for sport, there's no substitution for sport. No matter what sport you're in, and it's great and it's very encouraging even for parents to see a young man or a young woman heading off in the evening with a sports bag, knowing where they're going to a club, should it be football, boxing, or whatever. It's a great thing for everyday life. Sport can't be replaced. No,
for sure. We know the big names, and we better talk about them, because we've had incredible success at the highest level with boxers here as well. What jumps out from the book for people, or what will jump out of them in terms of people who've taken that step from the amateur to professional and made a go of it?
Well, I suppose I'll be a wee bit biased and say, because this one took me by surprise, was Jason Quigley's record. Took Jason Quigley by surprise. That, genuinely, we were going through this ourselves just for the last while. How many titles has he won? How many caps has he for Ireland and stuff like that? And when you see it written on a page, what the guy did in an amateur vest, and bear in mind, he's been professional since he won the world silver medal in 2013, 8 years ago. And over 100 years of the IABA, He's the most successful Irish amateur middleweight. You see the thing listed, and you kind of begin to go through it, and you know, at first glance, maybe you kind of shrug the shoulders, but you go through it. 11 Irish titles, 11 gold medals in an Irish vest, 3 European gold, world silver, and that's not even to mention the countless other things that he's done in the sport. 61 wore the Irish vest 61 times. He was only a senior boxer in about 2011 at senior level. So like he didn't even get that full crack at it, where a lot of those other guys were amateur for a long number of years.
Yeah.
Now, when that's put in right and you see his success, he's of course still going. So, you know, and it would be unfair to maybe talk about, you know, Jason too much, but he is, and there's, to me, no question, he is the star of the book because of where he went in the world.
Yeah.
He was like ranked number 1 amateur middleweight in the world, has been as high as number 4 in the professional game, and look, we all hope that he's going to get back there. But you look through it. I mentioned Cathal McMonagle earlier. Cathal McMonagle was probably unheralded because he was doing his boxing outside of Donegal.
Yeah.
And you know yourself, Charlie, when people are doing something away over there, people 100%.
Yeah.
And Cathal wasn't the kind of guy that ever looked for the limelight.
Quiet
you know,
lad,
he doesn't do social media. He doesn't be shouting from the rooftops. Goes away and just wins the title and comes back home again. You know, but you look at somebody like even Willie McLaughlin. Willie McLaughlin to me was unfulfilled in the sport, and then you start going through what he won, and it's remarkable the success he's had at other sports as well, while actually boxing. Looking at then, I suppose, the names that come to mind, Charlie, you know, you would have covered his fights, Danny Ryan.
Yeah.
I mean, myself and Peter did an interview, and Danny was the first elite champion from here, and, you know, Peter's been to all sorts of venues and all sorts of fights, and I would say that night, probably for Peter, tops it off to see a guy from his own club.
Yeah.
But you look then again, Paddy Doherty going and winning the Commonwealth medal in Edinburgh. Paddy went and fought for Ireland as well, turned professional, fought on the same card as Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
And then you speak about Muhammad Ali, there's a story in there of a referee, Jimmy Devlin from Clonmany, who the night that Ali beat Fraser in 74, this guy refereed some of the undercard fights.
Wow.
And like, to me, nobody had ever heard of him. Do you know? But he was a guy who'd gone from Clonmany, boxed professionally maybe 20 times himself, and all of a sudden he was centre stage. Like he refereed Duran, he refereed on the same card as Ali, he refereed Sugar Ray. You know, this guy was in the ring with these people, and again, people really didn't know of his existence, probably beyond his own place.
Yeah.
There's a guy also there punching Pat Bradley, and I believe he's actually connected to the Bradleys. Charlie Shane and Damien, who played for Van Harps and Fana down the years. There's I think a blood connection there. Again, of a guy who was recognised as a world champion in 1912, 1913. You know, there's a lot of stuff like that in there that people wouldn't be aware of. Charlie, your own town, Letterkenny. I mean, the mark that the likes of John McLaughlin made on the sport. And it's still been felt to this day, because the boxers of today are still in... They're still in that home, if you like, that they built in the early 70s.
Yeah.
You look then, the mark of people in Buncrana, Ballyshannon, what was real, like the home of boxing, I suppose, was Finner Camp, because it started with the army, like, you know. Yeah. And you take all of them coming in, like, but, you know, back to that, like the guys that stand out, I think probably there's a lot of wee stuff in there as well that'll jump out, like, you know, people like, you know, that went away and won 4 Nations medals, or went away to compete for Ireland at world level and stuff. Like, you know, we think we've got them. We think we've got them all in there. And, you know, there's also, like, there's wee quirky stories. The way the book's broken up, you know, it doesn't have to be read as a big package. Like, there's different chapters. You know, there's a story of a man from my own town, Fonzie Brown, who cycled to see Billy Spider Kelly. Cycled from Carrigan's, as it was, to Dublin to watch Spider Kelly fight. And, you know, and you can imagine in those days, like, the standard of both the bicycle and the road wouldn't have been as good as what they are now.
Or maybe the cyclist as well.
And, like, you know, going away in the dark of night or the dark of morning to see a boxing match. You know, there's all sorts of little things like that'll jump out to people.
Absolutely. Chris mentioned that guy refereeing at a high level, and a lot of people have refereed at a high level coming from the Donegal background as well, Peter.
That's right, Charlie. You had Jerry Daly, award referee, PJ Holland, and all them boys have all refereed, like, you know, at top class, you know, top tournaments, you know, all around the world, and they've been away with the teams in America, Irish teams in America, and all over, you know what I mean? Yeah. You know, some great men that gave a lot back to the boxing, you know.
This book will obviously appeal to boxing people, but it'll appeal to sports people, really, won't it? People who are interested in sport, because it's basically boxing in Donegal, a history. That's exactly what it is. And if you're interested in sport at all, it doesn't matter what it is, the history of it, you'll want to read this.
Every man will want to read that book there, Charlie. When that gets out and about, it'll be a great read. Like there's no denying that. And they're so boxing serious game, and there's some serious stories on it. But then you have that many light side of the stories as well. You know, some of the characters was there. Wee Patsy McGurdy, 3.5 stone. From Ballyshannon, like won 2 juvenile titles, then he won a 4-stone title, and he got up and sung a song in the ring when he was finished. And on Monday when he went to school, his schoolmaster got him to come up to the front of the class. He sung another song, You had Dr. Dennis McLaughlin, who was a great old servant of the boxing in Buncrana. His son Fergal won a juvenile title in Belfast, an Ulster title, and on their way home, this was in 72, they were stopped at a checkpoint by the UDR outside Derry, and the soldier come over to him, to Dr. Dennis, and he said to him, have you anything on tonight? And he says, I'm an Ulster champion on. And the soldier waved him on. You have all the light stuff like that there too. It's a fantastic read, Charlie, And
I'm sure there's a few stories that couldn't go into it, Peter.
A few stories as well that couldn't go into it too, Charlie, but it's all good crack, and it's definitely a great read, and I can only say it's a credit to Chris for the work that he has done. No other man would have took this on, Charlie. This man here is covering boxing this last 17 or 18 years himself. That's all he had to come and go on. The rest was research. Some research to get that there on the 350 pages.
Absolutely.
It's a credit to him.
Well, you can't be accused of not taking on a challenge, because your last book was to do with Patsy McGonigal, which I thought was as big a challenge as any man could ever ask to do. This one, the detail in it, Chris, you're a bit of a perfectionist, and sometimes perfectionists are hard to please. Are you satisfied with the end result here?
I am now, and it's funny, Charlie, the way the world works at times. So we had hoped to sign off on it last Wednesday, and we had a small snag, or what we thought was a big snag at the time, just in terms of the logistics with the printer and the way the thing was set up and all. So we were delayed by a few days. Now, that few days to me at the time, it seems like, Jesus, this thing's not going to go out at all. We're going to put the thing back on the shelf and nobody will ever see it again. But over the weekend and over the last couple of days, just with a final check, there's been little things that have been corrected. Now, I'm saying little things, but there was a man who was down for 5 titles when he's actually won 6. Now, to that person, that's huge.
Yeah, of course.
That's huge. Yeah. And again, I'm still not standing here and saying that this is actually 100% correct, but it's as close to perfect as you can get. I'm very proud of what's been produced, and those pages at the end, Charlie, to me, there's all those stories and all that, which anybody really can get by going through the old papers or going to the library or whatever. But those pages at the back, to me, are the most important thing, because that's the list of the people who have won. Their name is now there in black and white as a champion. And there's a guy here in Reform, we almost forgot about him, was Joe McCullough, who had, again, won a title for the Ring Boxing Club in Derry, but again, it was out of sight, out of mind. Yeah. So we've managed to put a few wee corrections like that in, and we've talked to clubs, we've talked to people. I've gone to libraries and gone through papers I've begged, I've borrowed, I've stole, I've been in Muriel Quigley's attic a couple of times, and all sorts. But I don't think myself, Charlie, I don't have any regrets in terms of I could have done anymore. And I'm very proud that Andy Lee's name is on the front cover. I mean, his posters and his photographs are up all over the wall here. He's a hero of Irish boxing. I mean, went and won the world title and took the difficult road as well to win it. I mean, he based himself in Detroit, knew nobody in Detroit really knew him. He lost his trainer, Manny Stewart, came back, reinvented himself again and won that world title. And of course, we've now sort of, a small connection in terms of his training, Jason Quigley. But to have a man of his calibre sit down and write the foreword that he did and put the effort into it, it gives it a real endorsement. And as well, Joe McHugh, the former Minister for Education, who has recalled with some sort of laugh to himself as well, I might add, documented his own experiences with the Carrigart Club, and there's a lovely photo of Joe with a young boxing group as well there, and a lot of other people from the IABA and the Ulster Council, and Peter as well, of course, who have endorsed it, which is very, very important to get that endorsement from the IABA and the Ulster Council, who have been extremely good in promoting the book and putting the thing out in their social media. It's so important, because boxing, you know, while it's a big sport in terms of its global appeal and it's Ireland's most successful Olympic sport, it's still a small community, and you know, it's while important that small community works together.
Yeah.
You know, as Peter said, like you know, I don't claim, I suppose, to be a boxing man, but boxing's been very good to me since 2004. I've seen the world through the sport of boxing, so I suppose this is sort of me throwing
Payback.
throwing something back into the sport as well.
Yeah, fair play to you. Fergal Carruth has endorsed it. Dominic O'Rourke, who's president of the IAPA, Councillor Rena Dunny on behalf of Donegal County Council, Kevin Duffy, the president of the Ulster Council, Peter, of course, president of Donegal, and as you say, Andy Lee and Joe McHugh. It's a fantastic publication, Chris. Many congratulations on it. That's it. It's Boxing in Donegal, a history. It's a fantastic history. Where can they get it now, Chris? Final question.
Well, it's on sale. The book is on sale for pre-order now. It was signed off and gone to print today. So Donegal.boxinghistory.com, people can pre-order it and that'll be posted out to them. Alternatively, we do hope to have it in the shops next Saturday. That's the 27th. No, it's not. Is it? Yeah, the 27th. We hope to have it in some local bookstores. And obviously, they're under level 5 restrictions. So for the moment, DonegalBoxingHistory.com, and we will be making announcements about bookstores in the coming weeks.
Absolutely.
But what we do have to say, Charlie, we've only done, because we didn't have that launch night and we didn't have the big fuss made of it, we've been limited in terms of the books we've printed, and there is only one print run. So they are limited. We've got over half of them already sold.
Okay.
So if people want the book, they really do,
Get a move on.
yeah, especially what I would call boxing people that, you know, will want this, you know, because their own people will be mentioned within the pages and their own clubs. And, you know, this is also a history of various towns and villages in terms of what was there. It's not just boxing or not just sport. There's, you know, tragic stories within here as well of, you know, drownings and bombings and what have you. Like there's a bit of a history in terms of the county as well. So there is an appeal there, but just to emphasise that there are a limited number, and we have, as of today, over half of them already accounted for.
Fantastic. And final word to you, Peter, a boxing man all your life, a proud moment that Chris has got this to this particular stage, and the history for 70 years is there for people to see, and hopefully we'll make a bit more history in the years to come, but up to now, it's all here.
It's a fantastic history, Charlie, and look at the back of that book there and see the Roll of Honour, never documented before on the book, that everybody knows what champions was here in this county all over the years. It's fantastic, a great job, like, you know, as I say, it's a credit to Chris, you know. The book is, and I would say it'll be a good seller, like, and definitely any man that's interested in any kind of sport or even a bit of reading for a bit of crack, that the book's there for him.
Okay. Thanks for hosting us, Peter. Delighted to be here at Rafo. Thank you very much.
Very much.
And Chris, all the best with it.
Thank you.
That's us. There it is again. Boxing in Donegal, a history. DonegalBoxing.com, Chris.
DonegalBoxingHistory.com.
DonegalBoxingHistory.com. That's where you'll get it. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining us. Good evening.